I would like to begin with a short exercise before any introduction because it sets out the question of this lecture more directly than an introduction could. One of my students, Maria Luisa, was working with a single sentence from a Mexican essay by the writer Carmen Bujosa. She wanted to see how artificial intelligence would translate it into English, and she was deliberate about the method. She did not request one translation. She requested two, using two different instructions. The first instruction asked for a literal translation, as close to the original wording as possible, even where the English would read awkwardly. The second asked for a fluent translation, written in natural English, as an educated speaker would write it. The two sentences on the screen are therefore both the work of artificial intelligence. They derive from the same original sentence by the same author, and they differ only because the instruction differed. Version A, on the left, is the literal translation. Version B, on the right, is the fluent translation. I would now ask you to make a judgment. Please read both versions carefully and decide which is the better translation. When I do this exercise, a clear majority typically chooses version B, the fluent translation. That's an understandable judgment. It reads more smoothly and it sounds like natural English. Please keep your answer in mind because we'll return to it soon. Let us examine precisely what changed between the literal version and the fluent one. There are 4 differences, and each of them is small. Considered individually, none of them appears to be a problem. In the literal version, the people in the sentence come after the American dream. In the fluent version, they're chasing it. The literal version calls them slaves, while the fluent version calls them enslaved people. The literal version calls them fugitives, while the fluent version calls them migrants. And a sister nation becomes, in the fluent version, a neighboring nation. Consider those 4 changes as a set. Each one moves the sentence in the same direction. Enslaved people is more humane than slaves. Migrants is more contemporary than fugitives. Chasing is more vivid than after. Each substitution on its own is defensible and might even be called an improvement. I would nonetheless like to propose a conclusion that may at first appear counterintuitive. The smoother translation is the more dangerous one. The version chosen by the majority, the one that reads so well, is the version I would caution a student about most strongly. The reason was identified by the student herself, and I'll present her analysis on the following slide. The conclusion I have just stated is not my own. It's Maria Luisa's, and the method by which she reached it is the substance of this lecture, so I want to describe it precisely. She did not simply read 2 sentences and prefer one. She constructed a comparison. She selected the 2 instructions deliberately so that the difference between the outputs would expose something neither translation could reveal on its own. The literal version was not the object of study. The fluent version was not the object of study. The space between them was. That is already a humanities method. One does not interpret a text by reading it once, but by reading it against something. Here is what the comparison exposed. Bujosa's sentence performs a deliberate and difficult operation. It asks the reader to picture migration moving in the opposite direction to the expected one. Not people moving north toward the United States, but enslaved people in the 19th century escaping south to Mexico, because Mexico had abolished slavery and would extend them legal protection. The sentence functions only if it feels strange. The strangeness is the argument. Consider, then, what the fluent translation did. The words it introduced, migrants, chasing the American dream, are the precise vocabulary of the migration narrative we already carry from contemporary news. The fluent version did not mistranslate, it did something more subtle. It took a sentence written to break a familiar narrative and quietly reattached it to that narrative. It returned the strange to the normal. And because it reads so well, the reader does not notice the loss. That's Maria Luisa's insight, and it's more precise than anything the model produced. A translation can become more readable while becoming less faithful to what the text is doing. Fluency is not neutral. It carries a cost, and the cost is incurred precisely where it's most difficult to detect. Hello and welcome to another episode of AI for the Humanities. As you probably have noticed, I am presenting a talk I have given and I'm sharing it with you. My name is Meghan McInnis-Domínguez and I teach at the University of Delaware. I taught a course on artificial intelligence and Hispanic literature this past semester, and I'll describe what my students did in it. I want to be clear about the larger subject from the outset. This is not fundamentally a lecture about a Spanish course. It's a lecture about the function of the humanities at a moment when a machine can produce fluent, confident, plausible text on any subject instantly. My argument is that this moment does not diminish the importance of the humanities. It makes them indispensable in a specific way I'll try to make precise. Here's the central claim, stated as plainly as I can. In almost every setting, the output of artificial intelligence is treated as an answer, a finished product to be received, accepted, and used. I wish to argue for a different relationship to it. The output of artificial intelligence should be treated as an object of analysis, something to be interrogated, as a historian interrogates a document or a critic interrogates a poem. Observe the structure of what just occurred. I did not offer this as a definition to be accepted. I placed two AI translations before you. You made a judgment, and a student's analysis showed what the judgment had concealed. You did not receive the claim as an assertion. You arrived at it through the exercise. Everything that follows is intended to make that procedure something your students can repeat deliberately in any field. I want to slow the pace here because this is the center of the argument, and it's considerably larger than any course or any discipline alone. When a university asks how to prepare students for artificial intelligence, the answer is usually a list of techniques: how to write an effective prompt, how to summarize a long document quickly, how to generate a first draft, how to use the tools efficiently. I do not dismiss any of this. These are skills, and students should possess them, but observe that they're all the same kind of skill. Each is concerned with operating the machine competently. None is concerned with judging what the machine has produced. There's a second kind of skill, and it is harder, slower, and far less amenable to a workshop. The capacity to read an output closely enough to determine what it's in fact claiming. The capacity to notice what it has quietly omitted, for what is omitted leaves no trace on the surface. A fluent paragraph does not announce the 5 things it failed to say. The capacity to recognize the framing and the assumptions within an answer that presents itself as neutral. The capacity to preserve ambiguity and complexity rather than accept the version that has been smoothed into something simpler, and the capacity to articulate one's own judgment to others and take responsibility for it. Here's a sentence I would most wish you to carry from this room. A student can produce a polished, fluent, confident AI output, submit it, be commended for it, and still have no means of knowing whether it's accurate, whether it's ethical, whether it's culturally sensitive, or whether it's historically true. The first list of skills, the technical list, cannot close that gap. It was never designed to. Only the second kind of skill can. And the second kind of skill is neither new nor mysterious. It's what the humanities have taught under many names for a very long time. We have not generally had to state this explicitly, because there has not before been a machine that could produce confident fluency without understanding. Let me make this correspondence concrete, because I believe it's exact rather than merely figurative. Close reading, the slow, careful, repeated attention to what a text actually says, rather than what we assume it says, is precisely the skill of evaluating an AI output rather than accepting it. Knowledge of historical context, understanding what a period took for granted and what it could not articulate, is precisely the skill of identifying what a model has omitted, since a model trained on the past inherits the silences of the past. The study of translation as the formal study of nuance and loss, which is exactly what occurs whenever an AI rephrases, summarizes, or simplifies. Ethical reflection is the discipline of asking not whether something can be automated, but whether it should be. The correspondence is close to one-to-one. I want to be precise about what I did in building this course. I did not take a literature course and add artificial intelligence to it, as one adds a tool to a syllabus. I asked a different question: whether the interpretive skills the humanities already teach could be directed deliberately and systematically at the outputs of these machines. The answer is that they can, and not by analogy. The same habit of mind that allows a student to see what a translation of Bulliosa suppressed is the habit that will allow them to see what a generated policy memo, or a generated case summary, or a generated historical overview has suppressed. The humanities are not behind on this question. They've been preparing the answer for centuries. I've been using the word humanities, and I want to be explicit about its scope, because I do not mean only those in this audience who teach literature. I mean every discipline named on this slide, and the contribution each already makes. The historian who asks of a document whose voice it represents and whose it omits is performing AI literacy, because that is exactly the question a generated summary requires and never prompts. The philosopher who asks what an argument has assumed in order to appear valid is performing AI literacy, because fluent machine reasoning conceals its premises with particular efficiency. The language teacher who can hear what a translation has flattened is performing AI literacy in its clearest form. The scholar of art or media who asks what a single framing choice includes and excludes performs the same operation on a generated image as on a photograph. None of you needs to become a computer scientist. The competence is already present in this room. What is new is only the urgency of directing it at this particular object. So when I say that a student can produce a polished output and not know whether it's accurate, ethical, culturally sensitive, or historically grounded, the judgment that closes that gap is not a single skill held by a single department. It's the distributed expertise of everyone who teaches a discipline of interpretation. That is why this is a humanities question in the broadest sense. Before I turn to the course itself, a brief note on the format of the session. At 3 points in what follows, I'll pause and ask you to work on a short response, and at the end, you'll be able then to apply that to the method to a subject that you teach. I'll pause so that you can do this, or you can pause the video and do this work and then return to the video. I mention this now so that you can listen for the underlying pattern rather than the Spanish detail. You'll be asked to use that pattern, not only to observe it. Let me describe the course briefly, since it's the evidence rather than the thesis. It's called Spanish 355, a 300-level, fully asynchronous course that had no live meetings. It's new for me. I've never taught this course asynchronously before. The subject is Hispanic literature of the 20th and 21st centuries, poetry, short fiction, and essays. Alongside the literary texts, students worked each week with AI translation, AI image generation, AI song generation, and structured comparisons between models with summarization and obviously with translation, as I mentioned before. The artificial intelligence was not an enrichment activity placed beside the course. It was the material on which the interpretive work was performed. Every week followed the same cycle in 7 steps, and the cycle is the transferable element. The students read the literary text and answered comprehension questions about it. They generated or analyzed an AI output of it. They placed that output beside their own reading and compared the two in detail. They named precisely what had been lost or changed. They explained that loss in a short video. They cited and documented their use of AI. And they responded to a classmate's analysis. The decisive word in that cycle is against. At no point was the AI output the destination. It was always the material against which the student's judgment was exercised. Generation was the second of 7 steps. The remaining 6 were interpretation. That proportion is the pedagogy. At this point, an audience usually raises the obvious question: did the AI simply do the work for the students? Let me be explicit about the boundaries. Students were permitted to use AI to brainstorm, to produce partial translations they would criticize, to generate summaries they would compare against their own, to make images and songs, and obtain grammatical help at the level of a single phrase. They were not permitted to use it to write their analysis, their reflections, or their final script, to rewrite whole sections, to narrate their video, or to present its ideas as their own. It was always a point of comparison, and they had to take ownership of their own work and make that very clear and apparent. The principle beneath those rules is simple, and it's the same principle as the thesis. Artificial intelligence could be the object of that the student examined, or it could be a limited scaffold. It could never be the student's voice or the student's judgment. At the moment it became the judgment, the assignment had failed, however polished the result. I'll present the work of 3 students. I have arranged the 3 deliberately because they escalate. In the first, with Bullosa's essay, artificial intelligence alters a few words, and a student identifies an ideological shift. In the second, with the short story by Rosario Ferre, artificial intelligence removes the entire argument of the text while appearing only to simplify it. In the third, with a poem by Alfonsina Storni, artificial intelligence reconstructs the text, and the lesson turns and points at the student's own process. The level rises from words to meaning to the whole work. I would ask you to attend to what remains constant beneath all 3. In each case, the decisive work is performed by a trained human reading. You've already seen Bullosa's sentence. Let me now give you the work it comes from. Carmen Bullosa is one of Mexico's major living writers, and the text is an essay, not a novel and not a story. That distinction matters more than it appears to. An essay is an argument made in the author's own voice. There's no narrator behind which to retreat, no character whose words might not be the author's. When an essay asserts something, the writer is asserting it directly. A translation that softens an essay is therefore not blurring an atmospheric detail. It's altering a claim that the author is personally making. The historical fact beneath the passage is one that most readers do not carry. Mexico abolished slavery in 1829, decades before the United States, and enslaved people escaped southward across what is now the Texas border into Mexico to obtain freedom and legal protection. The organizing idea for this example is not a single phrase, counter-memory. Bullosa is not adding a fact to the standard migration narrative. She's running that narrative in reverse in order to expose what it ordinarily conceals. Here's the mechanism, and it's worth observing in detail because it's the same mechanism in all 3 examples. The sentence is constructed as a trap in 2 stages. In the first stage, it allows the reader to settle into the familiar frame. Desperate people, the American dream, movement north. Every reader supplies that frame automatically. The sentence depends on it. In the second stage, it names the people, enslaved, fleeing south toward legal freedom, and the familiar frame collapses. The meaning is not located in either half alone. It's located in the collapse. The reader must enter the first frame in order to feel it break. This is precisely why the fluent translation was the dangerous one, and why identifying it required close reading. The words that the fluent version introduced, migrants chasing the American dream, belong to the first stage. By rendering the sentence contemporary and smooth, the fluent translation quietly rebuilt the very frame the essay was designed to dismantle. The trap was disarmed, and the disarming was invisible because the result was good English. No grammatical check would register it. No accuracy metric would register it. Only a reader who had asked what the sentence was attempting to do and whether the translation had permitted it to do so would detect it. That question is close reading, and it is also exactly AI literacy. They're the same act. Here's the first general conclusion, and it extends well beyond a Mexican essay. Polished does not mean faithful. Artificial intelligence is exceptionally capable of producing the polished version of anything. The polished version is not a neutral version. It is systematically biased toward the familiar, the fluent, and the already assumed, because that's what fluency is. A clearer summary of a historical injustice can quietly become a less disturbing one. A smoother translation of an argument can quietly become a weaker one. The danger is not that the machine produces something incorrect. The danger is that it produces something smooth, and smoothness is read as truth. The only defense is a reader trained to distrust smoothness and ask what it cost. That reader is produced by a humanities education, and by very little else, I would argue. I would like you to apply that conclusion to your own field now, rather than only hold it in mind. Consider where, in the discipline you teach, a clearer version produced by artificial intelligence might also become, without anyone noticing, a less truthful one. Pause the video and take a few moments. The second example raises the stakes. Rosario Ferre was the foundational Puerto Rican feminist writer, and La Muñeca Menor, or The Youngest Doll, published in 1972, is among the most important short stories in Latin American women's writing. I'll describe the story carefully and slowly because the example depends on understanding what was beneath the surface. On the surface, it reads almost like a fairy tale or a work of magical realism. There is an ant who, as a young woman, was bitten in the leg by a creature in the river. The wound never heals. It worsens year after year. She withdraws from the world and devotes her life to making elaborate, life-size dolls for her nieces. Dolls filled with honey, with porcelain faces, with eyes that she sets herself. It's strange, beautiful, and faintly unsettling, and a careless reader or machine will classify it as charming and eerie, a story that's about handmade dolls and family. That surface is a deliberate disguise, and this is the organizing idea for the example. The Gothic as social critique. Beneath the dolls, the story is an indictment. A doctor treats the ant's wound for decades and never cures it. It later emerges that he could have and chose not to because her continuing illness funds his son's education. The medical relationship is a sustained exploitation of a woman's body for a man's profit. That son, also a doctor, later marries the youngest niece, not from affection, but as a transaction that secures him a respectable family and her inheritance. He displays her at the opera as one displays an object, and the ending, whose ambiguity I will not resolve, is a strange and unexplained act of revenge. The discomfort is not a flaw in the story. The discomfort is the argument. Terre uses the capacity of the Gothic to disturb as a precise instrument, directed at colonial class structure and the ownership of women's bodies. Let me hold the 4 critical layers together, because the student's analysis depends on seeing them at once. First, the medical exploitation, a curable wound deliberately left uncured for profit. Second, marriage as a transaction, a woman acquired for status and money rather than chosen. Third, the body as a displayed object, a wife shown at the opera or on her balcony as a possession. Fourth, an ending that refuses to resolve, so that the reader is left holding the discomfort rather than released from it. These are not themes that the story mentions. They are its load-bearing structure. Remove them and there's no story. There's only a description of dolls. I dwell on this because the next slide shows what the machine did with it, and the full weight of the story must be present in order to register the size of what was lost. The student I will feature here, Rachel, requested 2 things from the AI. First, a faithful summary. Then she asked it to rewrite that summary with something controversial removed, which is exactly the instruction that a cautious student, a content filter, or a cautious institution might give. Consider the result. The faithful summary preserved the structure. The doctor does not cure her. He profits from her condition for 20 years. The younger doctor marries the niece for status. The wife is displayed as an object. The ending remains disturbing and unresolved. It's the summary of the story that Ferré wrote. The sanitized summary became the following: a loving aunt, beautiful handmade dolls, a treasured family tradition, affection passed between generations, the doll as a symbol of continuity. Every sentence is pleasant. Every sentence is also, in the deepest sense, false. Not because any single fact is incorrect, but because the removal of the discomfort removed the meaning. The exploitation is gone. The critique of patriarchal medicine is gone. The marriage as transaction is gone. The revenge is gone. What remains is the disguise the story employed, presented as though it were the story. Rather than tell you what's wrong with the sanitized summary, I'll ask you, consider the second column and enter 1 word in the chat. What disappeared? Here's the second general conclusion, and it's more serious than the first. A sanitized summary can empty a text of its critique while leaving its surface intact. Observe that nothing in the safe summary is factually false. There's no error to detect. A fact checker would find nothing wrong. The damage was done not by adding a falsehood, but by removing a discomfort. And removal leaves no trace. This is the failure mode that ordinary evaluation of AI cannot detect, because we mostly check AI for error. And this is not an error. It's a fluent, well-intentioned act of erasure. Consider how general this is. Every institution that uses AI to summarize will be inclined to prefer the version that is perhaps smoother, safer, and less likely to give offense. These are questions that we are discussing at many universities with changes that have happened to university systems and content and what we can discuss in classes. But a generated executive summary that omits the inconvenient finding, the generated historical overview that reduces an atrocity to a difficulty, the generated case description with the disturbing element professionalized away. In each, the test is that accurate is passed, and the meaning is nonetheless gone. The only instrument sensitive enough to detect that is a reader trained to ask what is missing and who benefits from its being missing. That question is not a technical skill. It's a close reading, and that's what we teach. So the second question to consider is this: what kind of understanding does a society lose when its difficult texts, its histories, its laws, its literatures are routinely made less disturbing by a machine that intends no harm? And this brings us to some of the questions about training of models and how the outputs are created, who will have control of these things as time progresses. These are humanities questions that we need to be sensitive to and aware of when looking at these outputs and how they may change over time. The third example is about Alfonsina Storni, who was one of the major modernist poets of Latin America, writing in Argentina in the early 20th century, and one of the earliest unmistakably feminist voices in the language. The poem is "Tú me quieres blanca," or "You want me white," or "You want me pure." I'll explain how the poem operates with some care, because the student's achievement cannot be seen without it, and because the poem is the most easily misread of the three. The poem is spoken by a woman to a man, and it begins by enumerating everything he demands that she be. He wants her white, he wants her made of foam, he wants her untouched and sealed like a closed flower, like snow, like dawn, before anyone has crossed it. A careless reading of the opening alone can mistake the poem for one that admires purity. That's the trap, and it's the same structural trap as Bugliosa's sentence. The poem requires the reader to occupy the demand before it turns against it. The organizing idea here is irony as critique. Every image of purity in the opening is not the poet's ideal. It's the man's demand, quoted back to him so that its hypocrisy becomes audible. The poem does not praise the snow, it exposes the man who insists upon it. Then comes the turn, and the logic of the turn is severe. Having recited everything he demands of her, the speaker neither pleads nor softens. She issues a counter-demand in the same imperative voice that he used. Go to the forest, she tells him. Live roughly. Touch the earth. Repair your own body and your own conduct with the discipline you have never imposed on yourself. And then, and only once you've made yourself to be what you demand of me, return and ask me to be white. Read as a whole, the poem is not about purity. It's about the asymmetry of who is required to embody it. The man is permitted to a life of experience and remains entitled to demand innocence of her. The poem applies his own moral standard to him, and the standard collapses because it was never intended to be lived by the person who imposes it. That's the critique, and it resides entirely in the irony, in the distance between what the words say and what the poem means by having her say them. Miss the irony, and the poem is inverted into the very thing it attacks. Holding that distance open is, once again, exactly the reading skill artificial intelligence requires, because fluent machine text is full of statements whose meaning is not their surface. A student, Rebecca, was asked to generate a song inspired by this poem. The instruction was specific. She was not permitted to prompt the AI to write a song in the style of Storni, because that would have delegated the interpretation to the machine. She was required instead to use her own reading of the poem to shape the instruction, to determine first what the poem means, and then direct the AI to serve that meaning. This was the chorus that the process produced. Doble moral, doble ley, pureza para mí, libertad para él. A double standard, a double law, purity for me, freedom for him. Observe what that chorus does. It does not quote Storni. It states explicitly the asymmetry that Storni delivered through irony. It's not a copy of the poem. It's an interpretation of the poem carried into a new form. And it's faithful precisely because a human being determined what faithful meant before the machine generated anything. Here the lesson turns. In the Bugliosa and Perret examples, the danger was in front of the student, something the AI did to a text, which the skill was to detect. In Rebecca's case, the AI did exactly what it was instructed to do. There was no mistranslation to detect and no erasure to expose. The risk had moved upstream into the instruction itself. The quality of the lyrics was determined before the machine ran by whether Rebecca's own reading of the poem was strong enough to direct it. She declined to prompt Where stung like stormy, because that would have surrendered the interpretation to the machine. She decided instead what the poem meant: the double standard, the irony, the woman's voice reclaiming the demand, and required the machine to serve it. The chorus carried the irony faithfully because a human determined what faithful meant before anything was generated. She had therefore won the upstream contest. The words were governed. She then took one further step. She submitted those lyrics to Suno, AI song generator, to be sung. Before I show you what was returned, I'll ask you to predict it. The poem is a woman's voice, addressed to a man who demands her purity. The lyrics preserve that. If those lyrics are submitted to a music AI with no instruction concerning voice, what voice do you expect it to use, and why? This is what Suno returned. The lyrics were Rebecca's: faithful, ironic, exactly governed. And Suno performed them in a man's voice. Consider what that means. This is a poem whose entire meaning is a woman speaking back to a man who demands her purity. The critique resides in who is speaking. Rebecca had controlled the words precisely. She had not thought to govern the voice because there seemed no need to specify the evident. And in exactly the place she had not governed, the machine discarded the one element that carried the meaning. It did not render the lyrics incorrectly. It rendered them correctly and performed them as the very figure the poem indicts. This is the same failure that you've now seen across 3 examples in its clearest form. The poem encodes its critique in a gendered voice. Suno decoded the surface, the words, flawlessly, and discarded the encoding, the voice, entirely. And note the lesson this adds to the previous one. Governing the instruction is necessary, but it's not sufficient because the machine acts at layers one does not think to specify. Judgment cannot be exercised once at the instruction and then trusted. It must follow the output through every layer. That's not a prompting skill. It's the close reader's refusal to assume that the surface is where reading should be limited. Let me draw the 3 readings together because they're a single argument. Lullosa placed her critique inside a reversal. Verre placed hers inside a genre. Storni placed hers inside a gendered voice. In each case, the meaning was encoded, deliberately, not on the surface. And in each case, the artificial intelligence performed the same operation. It decoded the surface and it discarded the encoding. It translated the words and lost the reversal. It summarized the plot and lost the critique. It performed the lyrics and lost the woman's voice. The encoding is where meaning resides in serious texts, and in serious documents, and in serious arguments in every field. To identify what had been discarded was the human work. That's the argument of this lecture in a single sentence. Step back now from the text entirely, because if you retain one slide from the case study, I wish it would be this one. Beneath the poems in the story, what were these students being trained to do? Not Spanish literature, not ultimately even AI. They were practicing close reading, attention to what is present rather than what is assumed, comparison, understanding a thing by setting it against another version of itself, the analysis of nuance and loss, the recognition of bias and omission, the discipline of separating their own thinking from a fluent external voice, and the refusal to assume that a correct surface indicates a faithful whole, which is precisely what the Suno result taught. Every one of those is an interpretive skill, and none is specific to Spanish. They are what a historian does with a contested source, what a philosopher does with a persuasive argument, what a lawyer does with a precedent, what a physician does with a differential diagnosis, and what each of you does with the material you teach. The Spanish texts were the occasion. The genuine subject was judgment exercised on fluent information that may be incorrect, incomplete, or quietly slanted, which is the precise condition in which every one of our students will work. That's the connection to your students' futures, and I want to state it without softening. In almost every profession they will enter, they will not merely be asked to use artificial intelligence. They will be handed fluent, confident, machine-generated material and asked to determine whether to trust it, to explain how they used it, and to take responsibility for what they did with it. The graduate equal to that task is not the one who prompted the most quickly. It's the one who was taught somewhere to read closely and to distrust a smooth surface. We know where that's taught. It's taught here by you. I will now keep the undertaking I made at the beginning, and this is the third occasion on which I have asked you to do this kind of work, not the first. You identified where smoothing would cost truth in your field. You named what a sanitized summary destroys. I now ask for the complete version. Take a text, an object, a document, an image, or a concept that you teach. The framework on the screen is deliberately simple. What AI output would your students generate from it? Against what would they compare it? What precisely would they critique? What is the interpretive or ethical issue that your discipline is uniquely positioned to see? And how would they document and reflect on it? So this is the moment to pause the video and take a few moments to consider these questions. Take the time you need. This is the beginning of a conversation for you to have by yourself, with your colleagues. You have the pattern. You have now used it 3 times. On this occasion, direct it at the capacity you most want your students to possess. Let me conclude. The humanities are not at the periphery of artificial intelligence literacy, waiting to be made relevant by it. They are at its center, because the central question artificial intelligence imposes is not technical, it's interpretive. The question a student must learn to ask is not only how the tool is used, it is what the tool has done to meaning, what it smoothed, what it removed, whose voice it quietly dropped, and how one would know. That's the oldest question we teach, and it has never mattered more than it does now. The goal was never to automate interpretation. The goal was to make interpretation visible. Thank you. And thank you for watching this episode of AI for the Humanities. If you liked the video, please like it. Please share it with your colleagues. Please drop comments in the comment box. Let me know what other types of episodes you would like to see. Thank you.
Two versions waiting on the screen. One is rough and one is clean. One keeps the distance, one feels right, but something disappears from sight. A fugitive becomes a name we recognize from today's frame. The sentence flows, the edges fade, and history is quietly remade. Every word can turn the view. Every silence tells us to what sounds natural may conceal the very thing the text reveals. Read between the lines, listen for the loss. Every smoother sentence may be hiding what it cost. Read between the lines, do not trust the shine. Polished is not faithful and fluent is not fine. The answer is not finished when the machine replies. Human judgment starts when we ask the reason why. wounded body, porcelain eyes, a doctor's prophet sanitized, a marriage dressed in silk and gold, a darker story left untold. Remove the horror, calm the scene, make every troubled ending clean. But when discomfort disappears, the argument may disappear. What was softened, what was changed, whose experience was rearranged? What seems neutral, safe and clear may erase what brought us here. Read between the lines, listen for the loss. Every smoother sentence may be hiding what it cost. Read between the lines, do not trust the shine. Polished is not faithful and fluent is not fine. The answer is not finished when the machine replies. Human judgment starts when we ask the reason why. Generate, compare, critique, reflect, cite, share. The machine can make a version, it cannot make the judgment ours. A poem enters melody, returns with altered gravity. A voice once tired, sharp and low, begins to dance inside the song. At first the rhythm seems untrue, until it opens up a view. Perhaps the music does not hide the pain, but shows the mask outside. Read between the lines, listen for the loss. Sometimes transformation can reveal another thought. Read between the lines, question every frame. Meaning is not fixed and judgment has no easy name. The answer is not finished when the machine replies. The humanities begin when we ask the reason why. Not the answer, not the end, just another text to question once again.